Back in 1735, John Peter Zenger was criticizing the British government in articles that ran in the New York Weekly Journal. After he was arrested for libel, he was found not guilty because he spoke the truth. He wrote facts. What a concept. Thus began the American tradition of seeking the truth through investigative journalism. I want to honor Zenger today in my talk and all other reporters who have been actively trying to tell the truth. I honor them, people like Jim Lehrer, who, despite his debate moderation limitations, has spent a lifetime trying to tell the truth, not just sell himself or products of his corporate sponsors. And often these people pay a high price, as did Judith Miller, who went to jail during the Valerie Plame scandal when she refused to reveal her sources. I want to honor a whole pantheon of investigators who maintained the tradition for decades. People like Joseph Pulitzer, who was once indicted for libel when he told the truth about bribes that were being used to pay off officials in the French Panama Canal Company. But like Zenger, he was freed thanks to his reliance on facts. Edward R. Murrow, many of you know, was a broadcaster with unchallenged integrity, and he was willing to stand up to powerful forces. Most notably, I think, was Senator Joseph McCarthy. There are many more, and I'm going to return to some of them later, like Walter Cronkite, or Seymour Hersh, or Katharine Graham, or Woodward and Bernstein, of course. And I'm going to dare to call these people the saints of the press, if you'll excuse the expression in a humanist setting. And I will also say, blessed are the fact checkers, for they are the children of good. Now, unfortunately, such role models are harder to find these days in this elusive quest for the truth. There are few places so full of roadblocks on the intersection of press and politics. It seems like anybody in the press is simply trying to make profit, and politicians are trying to get power. Candidates and parties spin so hard that the truth seems to disappear. Inconvenient facts? No problem. Just deny the facts as vehemently and as often as possible, and eventually the facts will be hidden by lies. Mainstream press does not seem capable of stopping this trend. So, Steve Bremner showed me this cover of the recent Time magazine, Who is Telling the Truth? The Fact Wars. I'm glad at least that the attention is being brought to this issue. Recently, Time magazine had an online poll, and it asked the readers which journalists they trusted the most. You know who the winner was? The Daily Show's Jon Stewart. Now, this is not who they liked the most. This is who they trusted the most, right? So Stewart received more votes than any other newscaster, including people who I think are relatively good, like Brian Williams or Katie Couric or Charles Gibson. We don't trust the news, and we trust politicians even less. I mean, you know the joke, how can you tell when a politician is lying? When he opens his mouth. Right? So with these popular attitudes swimming around, it's really, I wonder, is it really news that people don't trust the press, or don't trust politicians, or don't trust the press when they're talking about politicians? What is news, I think, is something that Reuters media news reporter Jack Schaefer said, is the fact that never have politicians in the press so expressed indignation at campaign exaggerations, fibs, and falsehoods. So he cites one example of when Paul Ryan accepted the nomination for the vice presidency at the Republican National Convention, and some of the media had headlines, capital letters, saying, the most dishonest convention speech ever. Right? Now, regardless of what you think about that, Schaefer discounts the hysteria over the current state of affairs by saying, quote, of course politicians and their campaigns lie. Of course they continue to lie even when they're called out. If you think otherwise, you're looking for truth in all the wrong places. Well, I'm pretty cynical, but I'm not that cynical, because I think we have to search for truth in the campaigns, or we might as well close up shop. We need these new fact-checking entities that have sprung up, such as factcheck.org. This particular project was initiated about 6 years ago by the Annenberg Public Policy Center, and it spawned imitators like PolitiFact and the Washington Post's Fact Checker, and there are two organizations now called Fact Check. One is a CNN organization, and one's an AP organization. So I think Schaefer is wrong in giving up in hoping for truth in politics. But he's not going to listen to me, because he said, quote, "You might as well fact check a sermon as fact check a campaign speech." Well, Mr. Schaefer, in ethical humanism, our sermons, or platform addresses as we prefer to call them, do aspire to truth, at least a little bit of truth, based on verifiable facts and common sense. Now, I get what he's getting at, but recently I think this danger has been exemplified by a notorious statement by a Romney pollster named Neil Newhouse. After Romney was accused of lying, Newhouse offered this bizarre response: "We're not going to let our campaign be dictated by fact checkers." Most of you heard that. But the more I listen to it, the more bizarre it gets, and not just the statement itself, but the brazen swagger that accompanied that statement. And now you're seeing that all over the media. Schaefer says that, quote, "Campaigns have come to regard their head-butting with fact checkers as a kind of badge of honor. It's like raising a naughty kid who enjoys timeouts." Like, yeah, caught you. No, you didn't. So this trend has led me to think of a movie phrase that's been used in a couple of different films. Facts? Facts? We don't need no stinking facts. Well, specifically, Newhouse was responding to criticisms of Romney's campaign because Romney was saying things about Obama's welfare position. And this distortion earned the Republican nominee a pants-on-fire grade from PolitiFact, a 4 Pinocchios rating from the Washington Post. And Newt Gingrich, a master of rhetorical sleight of hand, called it, quote, "patently false." But they barge ahead. Now, some may argue, some in particular in this room may argue, that this is just typical of the Republican Party out of touch with reality. A few years back, Stephen Colbert offered this parody of conservative guys like us. He said, talking about how they're ignorant of the rest of the world, regardless of what polls say. He says, "Guys like us, we don't pay attention to the polls. We know that polls are just a collection of statistics that reflect what people are thinking in reality. And reality has a well-known liberal bias." So before all of you liberals get overly excited, I'm not going to spend the rest of the day bashing the right wing, because I want to, in fact, try to emulate the mission of the Annenberg Policy Center when it says, quote, "We're a non-partisan, non-profit consumer advocate group for voters that aims to reduce the level of deception and confusion in U.S. politics." So Fact Check makes clear that both sides distort the truth. This summer, Fact Check criticized the deplorable tone of this particular campaign being marked by a cavalier disregard for facts on both sides. This campaign has become bitter and trivial. It's failing to engage the public in a fact-based discussion on the hard choices that will very soon be forced upon Washington. Last Monday, I read a Washington Post op-ed piece by Robert Samuelson, who particularly took to task the fact that neither candidate is talking honestly about our budget issues and our economic difficulties. Samuelson specifically pointed to Obama in particular because there's plenty of fodder coming out against the Romney campaign. But he said that he thought that Obama's deceiving the public in trying to indicate that his new tax plan to tax the 1% is going to help fix our deficit problems. And Samuelson pointed out that the math doesn't add up there. That even if Obama's tax plan was put in place and kept in place for 10 years, estimates are that it would raise $440 million more dollars. Whereas during the same time period, our budget surplus would balloon to $10 trillion. So that's 20 times more than what that tax plan would raise. Now, it's easier for those of us who swim in liberal seas, I think, to criticize Republicans, but I think fishing for truth is difficult for everybody. Brooks Jackson, who's a very seasoned political reporter I like reading, said, "Like any candidate, Obama's not pretending to give a detached or balanced picture to his audience. He's making a sales pitch, leaving out or glossing over inconvenient facts, twisting others, and sometimes stating things that aren't so." And you can check out more of the concrete stuff that he offers by Googling Brooks Jackson and the Obama stump speech. Now, given the proclivity of politicians to mislead us, I think it's important to have fact checkers with us at all times. Many journalists retreat from this, of course, because it's very difficult to uncover the truth. So they take on the more moderate task of simply reporting the facts. Reporting the facts. So what's the difference? What's the difference between reporting facts and finding the truth? Some people say facts are this: concrete, discrete, verifiable bits of information, like answers to who said what, where, and when. Whereas truth, on the other hand, is a more broad perspective that includes astute observations about the whole collection of facts. Now, obviously, the truth requires facts. So even if we're going to get all the facts, we still have to put them together in the right way. But in even getting the facts, it's a difficult piece. The Move On organization has proposed that the Presidential Commission on Debates have fact checkers on set ready to tell us whether or not the facts that they're saying are true. Little red or green lights could bing every time they mention a fact. I don't know, Steve who told me about this said it's like a presidential debate BS detector. It might be good. You know, I sort of had hoped to have something for our democracy on trial like that in our debates, and maybe our resources will get to the point where we can do something like that. But some cynics say, look, it's just absolutely incapable. The media is incapable of honoring the truth. And one of the ironies of it is that we have so many more access to media now. There's so many more channels. But the problem is that that means that everybody can find some broadcast medium or some journalist that says exactly what they believe. And that's easier, because then you don't have to think. It just confirms your prejudices and your biases. We all turn on the TV, I think, more often for entertainment than education, and that's unfortunate. We haven't taken on the ranting advice of, anybody see the film Network way back in 1976? There's a famous conclusion scene, actually Vince McKenna showed it when we were talking about our democracy program, where Howard Beale, who's played by Peter Finch, is this burnt-out newscaster, and he gets on his set and starts to rant. He basically breaks down. He says, television is not the truth. Television is a goddamn amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. So if you want the truth, go to God, or go to your gurus, or go to yourself, because that's the only place you're going to find any real truth. But man, you're not going to get any truth from us. We'll tell you anything you want to hear. We'll lie like hell. We'll tell you any shit you want to hear. We deal in illusions, man. None of it's true. So along with this fictionalized condemnation of the media as entertainment is the claim that media corporations simply are run for profit. That's pretty clear. While there continues to be a debate over the exact timing of the following quote, there is a consensus that it was said by the New York Times Chief of Staff, John Swinton, probably about a century ago. This is a pretty powerful thing for a century ago. There is no such thing at this stage of the world's history in America as an independent press. You know it and I know it. There's not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions, and if you did beforehand, you'd probably never appear in print. I am paid weekly for keeping my honest opinion out of the paper I'm connected with. The business of the journalist is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. You know it, and I know it, and what folly is this toasting an independent press? We are tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. Our talents and our possibilities and our lives are the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. It did not please his fellow editors. But this came from somebody inside the news industry over about a century ago. And control of the media by corporate means is even more complete today. The media is owned by corporations more interested in profits than truth. I mean, you can just look at the New York Times board, for starters. This is the paper of record, the most recognized paper in the United States. Their board is filled with people associated with powerful corporations and nonprofits, and they include Charles Schwab, eBay, Xerox, IBM, Ford, Eli Lilly, and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Its nearest competitor, from my view, is the Washington Post. Its board is filled with people from Berkshire Hathaway, Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Target, GM, and Rand. And one of the largest media conglomerates in the world, Time Warner, now owns Time Magazine, Warner Brothers, HBO, and CNN. Now, these boards don't prove corruption of truth-telling, but it raises grave, grave concerns. So, facts. What are facts? What are the truth? Even if some press outlets did manage to tell some of the facts, truth is hard to ascertain. They're not always obvious. It's the elusive grail for philosophers for centuries. And while some may think that truth will set you free, quite often searching for it gets you lost. So some people use the term truth with a capital T, and what they mean by that is they imply something that's objective, independent of one's point of view, something that is publicly verifiable. On the other hand, some people use the term truth with a little t to imply something subjective and dependent on a particular unique perspective. Right? So you have those two different ways of talking about truth. The lowercase truth leads to discussion about my truth and your truth. And at another time we can go down that road and talk about philosophical relativism. But today I want to talk about truth with a capital T. And what I mean by that is truth that is simply striving to be independent of prejudice or bias. Truth that clear-headed, rational thinkers could come to agreement on. I believe that actually is a possibility. Our ethical humanist tradition is built on that kind of truth, a truth that's based on observation and reason with a healthy dose of skepticism. Not truth written on some tablet for all time. It's not of our own choosing, but it is built by our experience and reason. So the founder of ethical culture, Felix Adler, spoke about this kind of truth. In 1898, he offered a lecture series entitled The Cardinal Virtues. On January 24th of that year at Carnegie City Music Hall, where he spoke until the New York Society was built, he said that the desire for truth may be wholly disinterested, without regard to any consideration of advantage, is shown clearly in the cases where it would be to the advantage of the person not to know the truth, yet he insists on knowing it. The courageous soul, he says, as brave men condemned to the military execution have to know to face it, refusing the blindfold, the courageous soul asserts itself in its might and says, I will follow the truth even if it leads to a desert. I will follow whithersoever it leads. We strive to be loyal to that truth here. We strive to rise above what we want to be and reach for what is. And usually we can distinguish between subjective truth and objective truth, though the latter may be hard to uncover and explain. Truth with a capital T is always going to be hard to uncover. But what scares me today is how many people deny that there's any distinction between objective and subjective truth. They deny that those are two separate things. They say that truth is whatever I say it is. And that's where the conversation ends. Now, some people are trying to do that deliberately to manipulate. Some people are doing it just because they're confused, I think. But blurring the line between the subjective and the objective is widespread in our culture. And it serves the narrow interests of politicians and the press and comedians. It does serve Stephen Colbert very well. Colbert's comic empire, in fact, is built upon this political perversion of the truth. I mean, he coined the term truthiness. Truthiness, or he says, for you Latin scholars, veritasiness. Now, these are tongue-in-cheek terms that are meant to imply private knowledge, from the gut, intuitive, that simply feels right. Right? Colbert said in one of his broadcasts, that's where the truth lies, right down here in the gut. Do you know that you have more nerve endings in your gut than you have in your head? You can look it up. I know some of you are going to say, I did look it up and it's not true. But that's because you looked it up in a book. Next time, look it up in your gut. I did. My gut tells me that's how our nervous systems work. It's so close to the truth. It's scary. Truthiness ignores concrete evidence and facts. When he's in character, Colbert uses this to justify any claim supporting his narrow, conservative, shallow elitism. He says, I give people the truth unfiltered by rational argument. He gave Fox Morning and News not to steal his new term, the no-fact zone. Now, he did an interview where he stepped out of character, and it's interesting to hear him. He said, truthiness is tearing our country apart. It doesn't seem to matter what the facts are. It used to be everyone was entitled to their own opinion, but not to their own facts. But that's not the case anymore. Facts matter not at all. Perception is everything. It's certainty. Certainty. People love it. That's one reason why in George Orwell's 1984, the citizens of Oceania accepted Big Brother government overall. The pounding propaganda of the Ministry of Truth stopped people from having to think for themselves. It relieved them of this burden. Instead, they were brainwashed with what was called newspeak by Orwell, which is a constant barrage of state-sponsored nonsense that declares war is peace, strength is weakness, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. They succumb to this psychic numbing because it's easy. Orwell writes, everything faded into the past, into the mist, the past was erased, the erasure was forgotten, the lie became truth. How close are we to that today? New York Times writer Neil Gabler blames Karl Rove. Now, Karl Rove was sort of a contemporary seller of newspeak. He was defending an administration that was doing whatever it wanted. And this is what he spewed. You might remember this about 4 or 5 years ago. 6. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying the reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, and which you will study too. And that's how things will work out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left just to study what we do. That's terrifying. This man was close to the center of power in our world. And it's terrifying not just because Rove said it, but because many of our civic leaders use the same thinking. Gabler writes, all politicians operate within an Orwellian nimbus, where words don't mean what they normally mean. But Rovism posits that there's no objective, verifiable reality at all. Reality is what you say it is. Why is it that a nation born out of the Enlightenment, based on reason and pragmatism, could fall for such rubbish? I think part of it is because of fear. Fear goes right to our brainstem. It stimulates our primitive resources. And FDR hit on it in his famous inaugural address when he said that fear can bring out our worst. When our country was in its darkest days, what did he say? He said, this is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive, will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror that paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat to advance. When fear dominates our culture, civilization can't advance. I don't think it's a coincidence that all this fear-twisting occurred during our war on terror. After all, the first casualty of war is truth. The attacks of 9/11 drove many Americans to lie, some of our leaders. And it drove more of us to accept the lies. We lie when we're afraid. We lie to protect ourselves. And often it's only the rare few that rise above this. I mean, that's what I was told when I was growing up. My teachers and my parents told me the story of George Washington and the cherry tree, right? And this apocryphal story was written actually 2 centuries ago by a Parson Weems, who was an American agent and book author who was actually well known for playing loose and fast with the facts. Weems wrote that when Washington's father asked him what happened to the tree, young George replied, "I can't tell a lie, Pa. You know I can't tell a lie. I did cut it with my hatchet. Run into my arms, you dearest boy, run into my arms. Glad I am, George, that you killed my tree, for you have paid me for it 1,000-fold. Such an act of heroism in my son is more worth than 1,000 trees, though blossomed with silver and their fruits of purest gold." I don't remember my parents acting that way. Oh, Hugh, you broke my favorite lamp. Thank goodness. You know, when I screwed up as a kid, I hid. I hid from the truth. I hid from the punishment, but not even really the concrete punishment. I hid from disappointing my parents. I hid from the shame that I know I'd feel if I was caught being bad. So I wonder, are we that little kid? Was it fear that drove us as a country to lie on the floor of the UN about yellow-cake uranium? Was it fear that led George Bush to lie again and again and again to support his invasion of Iraq that we all basically went along with? Is President Obama today lying about terrorism, about Guantanamo, about drone strikes? Will presidents in the future lie? Did all the presidents who signed this tie lie? Maybe. I'm suspicious. And I'm suspicious because of the time I grew up with. I was born in 1957. I didn't experience the height of Cold War paranoia, of that fear. I didn't experience McCarthy's madness. Unlike some of you, I didn't grow up haunted by atomic terror, literally exploding on test fields around the globe. I wasn't fed constantly stories about Soviet spies hiding behind every corner. I wasn't indoctrinated into the unquestioned allegiance to a flag that was keeping evil communism at bay. But many were. Some of you were. Daniel Ellsberg was. Now, if you're too young to know who Daniel Ellsberg was, I urge you to go look him up. He was a patriot. He loved this country, right or wrong, at least until he found out how wrong it was. Almost single-handedly, he changed the attitude in America about our war in Southeast Asia. When he discovered the lies that were propping up American policy in Southeast Asia, he was devastated. So he told the world. And he didn't tell it in a partisan way, because he explains that both parties were guilty of this, complicit in one of our gravest disasters. He said, these are his words, "Truman lied from 1950 on the nature and purposes of the French involvement, the colonial reconquest of Vietnam that we were financing and encouraging. Eisenhower lied about reasons for and the nature of our involvement with Diem, and the fact that he was in power essentially because of American support and American money and for no other reason. Kennedy lied about our own combat involvement, about the degree of our participation in the overthrow of President Diem. Johnson, of course, lied and lied and lied about our provocations against the North Vietnamese prior to and after the Gulf of Tonkin incidents, about our plans for bombing North Vietnam, about the nature of the buildup of American troops. Nixon, as we now know, misled and lied the American people for the first months of his office in terms of our bombing of Cambodia and of Laos, of ground operations in Laos, of the reasons for the invasions of Cambodia and Laos." He continues, "The American public was lied to month by each of these 5 administrations. And I say it's a tribute to the American public that their leaders perceived that they had to be lied to. It's no tribute to us that it was so easy to fool the public." That's what I grew up hearing. I grew up hearing, don't trust your government. Suspect power, question authority. I remember reporters who were willing to do the same, little glimpses of truth, capital T. I remember anchorman Walter Cronkite, the first to report from Vietnam that what was going on was not what we were being fed by the Pentagon. The military said we couldn't handle the truth. Well, it took Seymour Hersh to uncover the truth of the My Lai massacre and its cover-up. And in the greatest political drama of my adolescence, the Watergate heroes were Woodward and Bernstein. Against all odds, these Washington Post journalists put their careers on the line and the future of the newspaper. They dug and they dug and they dug, and they finally hit pay dirt. They were the ultimate fact-checkers. Where have the fact-checkers gone? There's little substantial independence of the press any longer. The bottom line rules. Negative stories about corporate owners are squelched and expensive investigative reporting is being slashed. Few media organizations work hard enough to uncover the facts. Those who speak out are often punished. We had better defend those who are willing to tell the truth, especially the ones who discover evil and corruption in the power structure. I'm talking about whistleblowers, the Karen Silkwoods who had to pay for it with their lives, or even the Julian Assanges who demand transparency. Now I know Assange may not be the best role model, I don't know, and maybe he was too indiscriminate with his release of facts. I mean, after all, even the woman who trusted Woodward and Bernstein, Katharine Graham, wasn't so naive to think that every single fact should be made public. She said, "We live in a dirty and dangerous world. There are some things the general public does not need to know and shouldn't. I believe democracy flourishes when the government can take legitimate steps to keep its secrets." Legitimate steps. And when the press can decide whether to print what it knows. But there's so many examples of political corruption and corporate abuse. And there's so many lies. There are lies upon lies. They're difficult to uncover. Truth is evasive. It doesn't come thundering out of the sky like a lightning bolt. It's uncovered in a painstaking step-by-step process. I think that's a pragmatic process, another part of our history. It doesn't evolve naturally or easily, but by a series of choices by people willing to take risks, to question, to search, and to think. We have to choose this relentless challenge of discovery over easy certainty and comfort. If we don't, we abandon our highest ideals, that's for sure. We can never write out the shameful parts of our history where lies dominated, but we can honor the truth by admitting our lies and growing up and meeting our responsibilities to the truth. I'm going to conclude with a few words from Felix Adler, the founder of ethical culture. This was from a speech called Truth and Emancipation. We must frankly recognize that evils exist and admit that they are evil and that no sophistry can make them otherwise. But we must also recognize that because the world is still in a process of making, still evolving, not yet a finished world, there is prospect that the good we hope for and aspire after, the possibility of good may in time become actual, may wipe out the stains and the blots and the blemishes. Well, given our own laziness, mine own included, and the power of money, I wonder if it's naive to look to the media for truth. I'm not going to give up my faith, but in order to escape these dark times, we have to demand the truth. I think we can take it. Adler finishes, he says, "It's very clear that the truth, so far as the tyranny of evil habits is concerned, will make us free. But the truth, it must be remembered, embraces two propositions, the one expressing the perception of what we are, and the other of what we want to be. Either apart from the other is valueless. Together, they are engines of salvation. We have got to want to be people who want to know the truth, and we have to demand it from our corporate sponsors. So blessed are the fact checkers. They shall be called the children of good." Thank you.